I'm looking at it from a 57-year-old point of view. You know, when I was 12 at school, we used to put 80085 into our calculators because it looked a little bit like boobs, eh?
Adolescence, it's the Netflix drama that's got the nation talking. We're going to be delving into the issues it raises, incel culture, the pernicious effect of Andrew Tate, and the dangers of smartphones.
We'll be talking to the head teacher who experimented with a ban in his school.
Police! What are you looking for? You're making a big mistake. He's only a kid.
Dad, I haven't done anything.
He's a good kid. Jamie, I want you to listen carefully.
What's going on?
I'm going to start off with asking you.
Do you know a girl called Katie Leonard? Yeah? Describe each other as friends then.
Is she dead then?
Why would you ask her?
So do you think it would be okay if we speak about it? I haven't done anything. You're a good dad, a great dad.
He hasn't been found guilty, he's been accused. What have you done?
Banged by a girl, you sausage.
You're not getting it.
What am I not getting?
Dad, you're not reading what they're doing. It's a call to action by the manosphere. 80% of women are attracted to 20% of men. You must trick them because you'll never get them in a normal way.
We've done nothing wrong, have we? Hey!
Look at me now!
It's crazy what your brain tells you to do when you're a kid.
So that's the trailer to Adolescence, which we've both seen some of, and we're not going to give away any spoilers here, are we, Kamal? Because you and I are only halfway through.
I must admit, I am looking forward to this weekend because I want to watch episodes 3 and 4. I've also asked my partner, because we weren't at home enough together this week, to make sure she has also caught up.
Yeah.
You actually want to then discuss it. It
Yes.
is one of those programmes, Camilla, that at the end of it, it is very intense, but also it raises so many questions that you actually need to discuss, not just amongst us as grown-up parents, but amongst our children. My children are in their 20s, your children are a little bit younger. But in a previous podcast, please do go and find it on YouTube, we discussed the effects of Andrew Tate, of incel culture, of, as you heard there in the trailer, the so-called manosphere. And I think a lot of us are floundering with what is it that we should do about this? Because I feel as a parent, it's so easy to misstep if you try and tell people off or say there's a better way to do it. And how do we really build what I describe as the social capital of young people so that they can navigate sometimes this sort of hellscape of social media and smartphones in a way that is much more sensible? But what this Netflix drama has done is written by Jack Thorne. He did the sequels to the This Is England series, which was brilliant, about white working class life in the UK. He's worked with Stephen Graham, the brilliant star lead character in this Netflix series in the past. What is it that we can do to ensure that we are still not having these same conversations in 5 years' time?
We actually interviewed Stephen Graham, who plays the father in this. I mean, 2 extraordinary performances. It's getting rave reviews because of the quality of the acting and also the method with which it's filmed, which is one take Basically, it kind of follows it right through, and you feel like you're absolutely in the drama yourself, which is what makes it such compelling viewing, aside from the subject matter. And then Owen Cooper, who is the child actor that plays the main character, Jamie Miller. And let's just listen to Guy Kelly, our colleague here. He did an amazing piece with Stephen Graham for the Telegraph magazine. And we've got some audio from that interview where Stephen Graham explains that he doesn't want to be doing the kind of tick box exercise of making this about a child who comes from a dysfunctional family. Why it resonates so much is because this is basically a pretty ordinary family and a pretty ordinary teenage boy. And that's what Stephen Graham really wanted to get to in this.
There's quite a few things that go, oh, let's look at these people through the eye of a microscope, shall we? Let's see what's wrong with them. Oh, okay. Let's colour them with this trauma. Let's give them that. It's like not everyone's like that. Sometimes for the context of art as well. The working class are described and depicted and shown on the screen sometimes not as fully rounded human beings. And what I really wanted to be super conscious of, and this is what I said from the very beginning to Jack, I said, look, and I'm not being disrespectful, but I don't want it to be mum's an alcoholic, dad hits him, and this is why he's damaged. I didn't want it to be that. I didn't want that. I didn't want that story told. That's not what I saw. I just wanted it to be about what happened.
His point is this could happen to anyone. He talks about the mother being maybe the manager of the beds department at John Lewis.
Yeah.
The dad, of course, plays a character who is a plumber. He then goes on to the connected issue, which is the issue of smartphones and therefore constant access to social media.
We have these things where these are parenting our children just as much as we are, if not more sometimes. And when they go in their rooms, they have this access to, which is great in many aspects, but also I think it's very dangerous as well in other aspects. When I was a kid, when an argument would happen or something would happen, and then at least at 4 o'clock it was kind of done. Do you know what I mean? So you could go home and, yeah, look, I mean, we've all had incidents in school and things that have affected us hugely, do you know what I mean, at that particular time. But there is an aspect of it being able to switch off a little bit. But today, ping, 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 these things, you can't escape it. So it goes home with you as well.
And of course, this is very relevant to today's debate in Parliament because we've got the online safety bill going through the House of Commons and the House of Lords. It's resonated at such a high level, Kamal, that the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, is asked about it at Prime Minister's questions. And this is what he says.
At home, we are watching Adolescence with our children. I've got a 16-year-old boy and a 14-year-old girl, and it's a very, very good documentary to watch, or drama. This violence carried out by young men, influenced by what they see online, is a real problem. It's abhorrent, and we have to tackle it. We are putting in specialist rape and sexual offences teams in every police force, doing work on the 999 calls. But this is also a matter of culture that I think it's important that across the whole House we tackle this emerging and growing problem.
In Guy Kelly's piece, and we'll put a link to that in our show notes, his interview with Stephen Graham. Stephen Graham actually goes through the reasoning behind why this Netflix drama was made. For example, the murder of Ava White. She was a 12-year-old girl stabbed by a 15-year-old boy in Liverpool after a dispute over videos and social media videos in 2021. And Brianna Jai, the 16-year-old transgender girl who was lured to a park in 2023 and was fatally stabbed. A lot of that, it appeared to have been motivated by social media content. So there is this really deep issue. And we've just had Gareth Southgate, the former manager of England, the Dimbleby lectures he's just done, where he talks about how we should do more to give men positive role models.
Young men are suffering. They're feeling isolated. They're grappling with their masculinity and with their broader place in society. Ironically, parents know exactly what their children are doing in the physical world, but they're losing control in the virtual world, where young people are exposed to far more danger. And failure is something that is shared with the world. The result is that too many young men are at risk of fearing failure precisely because they've had so few opportunities to experience and overcome it. They fail to try rather than try and fail. What seems to have changed is a sense of traditional family and community role models. As real-world communities and mentorship declines, young men end up withdrawing, reluctant to talk or express their emotions. They spend more time online searching for direction and are falling into unhealthy alternatives like gaming, gambling, and pornography. And this void is filled by a new kind of role model who do not have the best interests at heart. These are callous, manipulative, and toxic influences whose sole drive is for their own gain. They willingly trick young men into believing that success is measured by money or dominance, never showing emotion, and that the world, including women, is against them.
I mean, fair play to Gareth Southgate for making that speech, because in some respects it seems a bit off-piste. And then you think, well, no, hang on, you did manage the England football team, which is full of role models for young men and for teenage boys. And I also like any narrative around the positive power of sport. One of the reasons I got all three children, but specifically my son, who plays a lot of football, into football is because I wanted him to be spending his weekends doing something meaningful in a team, learning what it means to win, learning what it means to lose, learning what it means to be mixing with other boys that he might not naturally mix with in his own home or school environment. The trouble is what he didn't say there, and I don't want to demonise footballers in the same way I don't want to demonise all celebrities, but there are good footballing role models and bad ones. You know, the materialism and narcissism and actually misogyny that has crept into the beautiful game is a problem as well. You know, you try and take your son to the football terraces and you hear the kind of language that is being spouted. I wouldn't regard the average football terrace as a particularly female-friendly environment, let alone a child-friendly one. You actually have to go to a women's match to have a female-friendly and family-friendly environment. So he hasn't hit upon that. But look, it's clear that Southgate is a decent man, he's a family man, and he is a man that actually does care about the youth of today. So I think that intervention should be welcomed. It's worth reflecting, actually, and we've spoken about this before, Kamal, about that Centre for Social Justice report entitled Lost Boys, talking about the fact that boys are now behind girls in school, in higher education, and in earnings when it comes to the 18 to 24-year-old age bracket. And that report did lay bare this idea that boys have lost their way, but it identified the following factors which aren't covered by Adolescence, because the child in Adolescence comes from a perfectly functioning family, and I get the value of that, but what was identified here was a lack of education and opportunity, that fatherlessness was a major factor in why quite a few boys are falling behind, and also, and Southgate rightly touches on it, online pornography and the objectification of women that has become far more prevalent just because of the easy access to such material.
What Adolescence does so well as well is show how us as parents are completely unaware of this world that not just young boys but young people live in at a time when they are very vulnerable. This is a bit of a leap, Camilla, but just stick with me. Do you remember we interviewed Dr. David Bell about transgender issues, a psychiatrist? And he said that the vulnerabilities of the brain to inputs in the ages between sort of 13 and 19 are very, very high. And what has happened, and this is connected to the trans debate, is that social media has filled that vulnerable space where young people are quite rightly breaking away from their parents, challenging authority. They don't want to be told what to do. But of course, we need to give them the social capital through something like sport or friendship that allows them to navigate that space and not be overwhelmed by it. And this is where we've spoken about this a few times, Camilla. The platforms have given themselves huge power in what it is they produce and algorithmic recommendations. Smartphones have put that in every person's hand 24 hours a day, but they have not made themselves or taken on the responsibility of the effects of that for this group of people in that 13 to 19 to 20. It's been interesting watching my children's journey into their 20s, which is where I think, although it is a time of real concern, it's not a time to panic, is that they are very deliberately choosing, and frankly not through stern words from their father, to get rid of a lot of social media ways of interacting, of disabling apps like TikTok and Instagram and not using them. Because if we can get them through that 13 to 19-year-old or 12 to 20-year-old period, when they come into adulthood, they have the levers then.
Yes.
And you can see that we need to encourage them and not demonize them. Because frankly, Camilla, when you're a 14-year-old boy, having a flash car is cool. Whatever your parent says to you, oh, don't let money, it looks cool.
I know.
And so they're going to always go there. But then how do we get them to come out of the other side?
But then you've got this situation where they're just flooded. They're absolutely flooded with material that tells them that all they really need is a flash car, to not really do all that much work, to have 5 girlfriends on the go at once. And by the way, they can be disrespected because, you know, why don't we use porn as our sort of blueprint for how we want to behave towards women? It's like too uneven. Back in the 1980s, you might aspire to be Michael Knight from Knight Rider. Now you're literally being targeted by all of these very negative influences. And I think as a society, we haven't valued the power of relationships, family, motherhood, fatherhood. We've got all of these reports out about how lonely young people are because they're physically not spending enough time with each other. You know, they're in their bedrooms by themselves. They're not going out to dances and discotheques like the old days. You know, they're making online connections, but are they actually spending enough time with each other to sort of understand the value of what really matters in life? Because you and I know what really matters in life. It's relationships with people.
Yeah. It's family
love,
time. It's human
family,
contact.
It's friendship.
It's what's described as engaging with real life.
Yes.
Is the thing that gets you
Rather
through.
than taking photographs and selfies of your experiences. Live the experiences. But let's speak to somebody who actually gets into schools and addresses these very issues with teenage boys and young men. It's Michael Conroy. He's the founder of Men at Work, which delivers training for professionals in supporting the healthy personal development of boys and young men, challenging sexism and fostering violence-free relationships and communities. Michael, I know you're a father yourself of a daughter and a son. Kamal and I both have 5 children between us, including 2 sons. We've sort of discussed some of the issues here, but we'd like to discuss with you some of the solutions to this. What can be done? Parents have been watching Adolescence, have been basically thinking, there for the grace of God go I, actually. And they're extremely worried about the pernicious effects of smartphones too.
Yeah, I think being worried is a rational response when we are aware of what can go wrong. But I think that we need to take a deep breath and think, what do I want? What positive thing do I actually want in the life of my son? If we're thinking about our sons, for those who have them. And then if we focus on the positive, you know, I want him to have good friends and to know what a good friendship is. And I want him to have fun and do age appropriate things. And I want him to be able to ask questions if he doesn't know things. And I want him to be able to be curious. And I want him to be able to progress in a healthy and whatever is bespoke to him according to his interests. And I want him to be true to himself. And I think that spelling out the positive, the things that you want, as your son moves towards adulthood, through adolescence and into adulthood. I want him to have a partner if he wants to have one, and I want him to treat them well, whoever it is, a boy or a girl, but I want him to be treated well too. And so we need to have conversations about what that looks like. I think the danger is, and certainly in the wake of particular headlines or this a cultural phenomenon which adolescence has become, there's no other way of describing it. I've done about 18 interviews in 12 hours. I'm my head spinning with it. But I think that's a good thing, because that conversation, like a national conversation, is well overdue, because our boys have been left to the wolves. By the wolves, I mean digital platforms who do not give a damn for them at all, and occasionally we'll put a fig leaf of decency on and fined £1 million, but that's to somebody who makes that every minute. So I think our kids generally, or girls too, have been left to the wolves. The digital platforms, your X's and your Twitters and your Snapchats and your Instas and your Facebooks, all of them, and all the other kind of apps that pop up and go, TikTok for sure. We've just basically abandoned them en masse. And when they start to do things which are alarming, or about to themselves or to their peers, or to say things, it's almost like there's something wrong with them. Well, what do we expect? Input and output. and I think collectively, we've almost, as adults, and I say we collectively, I include myself in that, we've almost been charmed by the facility that the internet offers us to get cheap flights and get a shed delivered overnight, and God knows whatever it is that we use it for, to get. And it's almost like it's so useful, it's so snazzy, it's so quick. Yeah, let's not ask too much about safeguarding, because that might spoil the fun somewhat. And I think this is the chickens are coming home to roost. And I think so. To answer your question, what can be done is a lot by everybody. A lot can be done, no matter what your job or your role, or if you have 5 minutes conversation with a young man, then there's something. How do you make that 5 minutes count?
Michael, I think one of the things about adolescence for many parents watching it, and as you say, Camilla, you and I are both parents, and all three of us are parents, is that teenagers and younger people in their early 20s are able to live in a world that their parents have no access to. And one of the favorite messages is MOS, mother over shoulder, to warn other people on the message systems that a parent is watching them. Yeah. What advice would you give to parents? Because we know that teenagers and young people, they're on a journey to get away from their parents, and that's a very necessary journey. So what should parents do? Should they lean in and try and control? Is it about discussion, or how do we enable our children and young people to navigate these spaces, given that the platforms are not, we know they are not going to do the work they should be doing?
I think acknowledging that it's wrong to have implicit faith on big company names, to think, oh, well, it can't be that bad, it's Facebook, it can't be that bad, it's Twitter, it can be, it absolutely can be. So I think not being naive, but not being panicked and not being rushed. There are ways of having conversations. So, you could say, you could dive in and say, right, you sit down, I'm going to read you the Riot Act. I'm terrified what you're doing. I think you might be an incel. I'm being a bit cartoonish here, but I'm just trying to get across that impression of there is more than one way to achieve an objective. And in fact, some ways just you will never achieve the objective, because often young boys will feel somewhat cornered, put up against the wall, and the only thing to do is to push back. And people like Andrew Tate, for example, I'm sorry to say Voldemort, but there we go. We have to mention him because he's a key cultural figure, not for good, but there we are. He primes boys and young men by saying the matrix, us, the adults, the parents, the teachers, the journalists, whoever it might be, they will try and stop you accessing my material, because they know I'm telling the truth. And then sometimes we collectively, as a parent or as a teacher, will blunder in and say, no, you can't talk about him. We don't talk about him here. And then who's the smart guy? It's Andrew Tate, isn't it, in that conversation? Because the boy thinks, wow, he knows how things work. So I think the danger of talking, particularly to boys, about him, is that we walk through it in a space which is the shape of Andrew Tate, and he's set the terms of the discussion. Whereas we need to think back and think, actually, I'm not going to meet you in a conflict situation. I'm not going to speak in high temperature and high voice. It's going to be calm, it's going to be quiet, and it's going to be regular bits. When we're going out for a drive, having a walk, walking the dog, watching telly together. What do you think about that? You know, and why? And that's an interesting phrase. I've come across this phrase, you know, red pill. What's that about? Do you know? And so many of us, I think, probably, I mean, you know, my job means that I've known about a red pill for 15 years or so, but that's an unusual kind of line of work. There will be people now watching Adolescence, and it's no spoilers, who are finding out about these words and what they mean and the emojis and the secret language, if you like, and thinking this is awful and dangerous and terrible. And yes, it is, and it can be, but rushing to do something about it. We can all do a lot, but we need to do it in a cool way, in a calm way, regularly. So that what we want for our boys, and keep coming back, what do we want for our boys? I want them to have good lives. And what is a good life? Well, it doesn't necessarily involve having more than a bit of money. That's not it. And then you think, actually, am I modelling that? Do I keep going on about money, or he's skint, or he's got a rubbish job, or whatever? Am I actually feeding into this a little bit? And you know, like the Andrew Tate is the sum of other people. He's not a particularly powerful or interesting or intelligent man. It's the sum of lots of people saying little bits of the same thing, and he just kind of articulates it in a way that his technology sort of facilitates, and the algorithms keep shoving it at boys. So there's a lot that can be done, but I would advise on the how, and choosing moments, but thinking this will not ever be sorted in one conversation.
But then,
absolutely no way.
But then maybe I'm thinking about it, Michael. We got into this situation where we are actually physically having fewer conversations with young people because we're also on the screens. This is what has happened. You know, what you're talking about and what we know to be right as parents is that if you actually speak to young people, you take the time to speak to them. Sometimes I've had the most success with my kids just taking them on a walk. Leave the phones at home. Let's go for a walk, and you get a lot out of them, a bit of fresh air.
Often being in the car is meant to be a good place because you don't have direct eye contact all the time.
But I feel that the grown-ups have also been asleep at the wheel here. As the kids are on their phones upstairs, the grown-ups are on their phones downstairs, and just family conversation has, I'm afraid, diminished in recent years. It just has. I mean, is there, because in your experience, Michael, what is the most successful tool that you use to connect with young people? Is it literally the art of conversation and communication effectively at the end of the day? Yeah,
absolutely. It's presence. It's about being curious and not being accusatory and being reliable and predictable and a little bit dull and being dependable and being there. And it won't always work, but if they know you're there, genuinely there, and you are a good listener and a good asker, and you're willing to share something of yourself and your own concerns and vulnerabilities as well, and not presenting yourself as the finished article, the one who knows everything, the one who's sorted and sussed, because they know we're not. And honestly saying, you know what, it's a difficult gig being a 14, 15, 17-year-old lad. I'm looking at it from a 57-year-old point of view. You know, when I was 12 at school, we used to put 80085 into our calculators because it looked a little bit like boobs, eh? That
was humour in those days, Michael. I remember it well.
Yeah, I think I do hear from schools that it still happens. So but if I was 12 or 11 or 10 now and writing those letters into Google, what will come my way within 10 seconds? And then what? And then what? And then what? And what does my childish brain do with this extraordinary, weird stuff that I'm seeing? Click, click, click. And then the algorithm has got me. It knows that I am somebody to push that to. And that's a risky situation. That's a vulnerable situation. So I would see, I keep hearing the thing about lost boys. And I wish that report had called them vulnerable boys instead, because there's something about being lost, which means it's irredeemable. And it's not our fault that they're lost, but it is collectively our fault that children are vulnerable. So I like to kind of avoid sound bites and think, what are we talking about here? The boys are not lost at all. You know, they are vulnerable. And what is that? So this work can be framed, and I know that some people represent it as, it's man bashing, it's boy hating, it's this, that, and the other. And you think, well, naively or not, I see this as a direct opposite. I see this as an expression of care, a duty of care, because if we see people with vulnerabilities and risks around them, then I feel it is beholden upon us to engage in a conversation with that young person about those vulnerabilities and not accuse them of causing them, but saying, how are we going to work our way through these? And how do we get to the good stuff? And I think sometimes over the years, I've seen it happen, and I've no doubt done it myself, that we kind of react and we talk about the bad stuff and about reducing bad stuff and stopping things. And you think, well, what do we want though? What's the good stuff? Let's talk about that. Let's engage young men in conversations about what is a good friendship? What's it about? What does it mean to you? You know, what would you like to have when you're in your life? You know, do you want to have kids? Do you want to have a partner? What would that look like? Asking a question of not what do you want to do, as in your jobs, but who do you want to be? And that does chime a little bit with what Gareth Southgate was saying about character, and about what do you want people to feel about you, and how do you want them to feel when you're around? These are questions I was never asked at school. I don't think most people are ever asked them, or at home, to be fair, you know, because the questions don't really come up, but we're very used to as a line towards material success, getting a job, getting your A levels, getting a car, getting this gap, but not about the who. And so a bit of a corny strapline for the work that I do is it's all about being safe for you, son, because you matter. You're a wonderful human being, complex and vulnerable. And whether you want to accept that you're vulnerable or not, you are. But also you have a duty to others to be safe to be around, because we live in the same planet. We're in class together, we're in a lift, on a bus, at home, in a nightclub. We are together. Therefore, our safety and the safety of women and girls is absolutely symbiotic. There is no split. And I think sometimes some responses don't see that, and they separate it, which is why some men's rights activists, so-called, I disagree with their self-labeling, only ever talk about, male suicide and male this and male that. And you're thinking, yeah, it's part of this. It's part of this too. So it's about trying to develop a holistic view that, can we be safe in ourselves if we're not safe for other people? And can we be safe for other people if we're not safe for ourselves? A little bit like the old oxygen mask thing on a plane. It's okay to exercise self-care and have a good, positive self-image, because then we're good for other people, and we can be a good colleague and a good fellow student and a good dad if we become dads, and a good employer, or whatever it might be. But it's kind of getting ourselves sorted. And that requires some reflection and not sleepwalking towards adulthood along a path where porn has influenced the structure of the path, and people like Andrew Tate and God knows all the other creeps, so I can't even be bothered remembering their names, but we know that kind of world they are, because they are offering our boys the illusion of power, the illusion of respect, the illusion of success, and the reality of frustration, shallowness, isolation, dislocation, and contempt for women and girls. And that does not lead to a good life for anybody. And I think viewing people like Andrew Tate as misandrist, because which of course, you know, is the word that you hate men and boys, and some people's heads get spun by that, because but he's a champion of men, he's pro man and pro boy. You don't lie to people you care about. How could he possibly be pro boy? He's a liar. He's a liar, and he's modeling exploitative, disrespectful, hateful behavior to boys who are at a peak time of development. You don't do that to boys if you've got any shred of concern for them. We can all do something. We mustn't panic, but we must be aware of the scale of risk and challenge, but to view our boys as being vulnerable. And if we see that vulnerability, they have to walk towards them, listen to them and how they explain their experience, and be a consistent, positive presence in their life. We have to find out what's going on with them, and we have to show up in their life.
Some really great advice there, I thought, from Michael. As a parent, I was slightly lapping that up. What was really smart was him saying that Andrew Tate is actually guilty of misandry, the hatred of men, the dislike of men. And actually, if young men can suddenly realise that this guy's not on your side, this guy is the person who's actually demonising you, I thought that was very smart.
Really clever point. Let's talk about the smartphone and the role it plays in school, because another theme of adolescence is it depicts the school environment as chaotic and dominated basically by pupils looking at screens. So let's speak to the British headmaster who carried out an experiment. He banned smartphones in his secondary school. Let's hear what the results were. John, if we can call you that. I know you're used to being called Mr. Player, but can we call you John?
It's fine. Fine.
You undertook this extraordinary experiment with a group of Year 8 students, so they're about 12 to 13, is that right, John?
Yeah, that was the idea.
And they gave up their phones for 21 days. This was in collaboration with the University of York and a production company called Bold Print Studios. And then it formed part of this great documentary called Swiped, the school that banned smartphones, which was aired on Channel 4 in December, presented by Emma and Matt Willis. First of all, what was the reaction of the children when you told them that you were taking their smartphones away?
Well, I think, as you can imagine, most young people, in fact, I'd probably go as far as say most adults wouldn't be overly keen when you tell them that you're going to take their smartphone away from them. But actually, the process was about them nominating themselves to actually be part of this study. We worked with the families. We worked with the production company to make sure that there was a vetting process as well, so that all the students that would be part of it had the right protections and the right support around them to enable it to happen without necessarily putting them at any risk. But in essence, I think they really knew what they were going to give up until they actually give it up. It's all fine in theory until you have to hand your phone in, and then it's slightly different.
It was amazing watching it. One of the young people involved said it was like going back to the olden days, which I think, Camilla, we call our childhood, but we'll get into that a bit later. John, what was the effect of young people giving up their phones?
Well, I think you can see on the documentary that one of the biggest effects was there was a genuine improvement in their mental health in just 21 days. And actually, I think, I've spoken at length about this in various formats, but the reality is this is a device and this is a process that's happened before we've really thought about whether we're okay with it. We have so many regulations in society for things that we know are dangerous to our health. For alcohol, for nicotine, we have protections to make sure that young people in particular aren't accessing those. And yet with smartphones, it's grown so fast. The technology's grown faster than we've actually had the chance to pause and think about whether we're okay with this. So interestingly, we're now behind the times with what the impacts really are. And there's a number of studies that are out there demonstrating the negative sides of smartphones, the negative impact that it's having on young people's mental health, that it's having on young people's relationships. One of the biggest ironies of this is that it's seen as a way of keeping in touch with people, and yet it's actually probably dividing people more than ever. And then when you look 10 years into the future, for example, I mean, currently the highest absence rate from work we have in the country is for 18 to 25-year-olds. The highest rate of mental health problems is for 18 to 25-year-olds. So we have a generation that's grown up with these devices at a secondary school age that are struggling to actually cope with how that happens. The experiment for just 21 days demonstrated that some of the negative experiences, the anxiety, the symptoms linked with depression, I mean, the statistics were quite mind-blowing. The fact there was a 17% reduction in anxiety symptoms in just 21 days, 18% reduction in symptoms linked to depression in just 21 days. When you think about the billions of pounds we spend in the NHS in trying to help with mental health issues in the country, we have a choice right in front of us that we could probably do better to enable us to understand and improve our mental health as a society just by improving that relationship with our phones. And that experiment showed it really quickly on just a tiny scale. So it was really fascinating that way.
Outside the documentary, what's your policy at the school? There are a number of, whole boroughs. Barnet, for example, has banned smartphones in many of its schools. What's your school policy, and what's the kind of local authority policy in Essex on smartphones?
So I think, like most schools, we have our own policy where at the start of the day, it should be turned off and put in their bags, and then they can have it back at the end of the day. That's the way it works. If it's not seen, it's not heard, it's not taken away. However, there is no real guidance about this. I mean, in Essex, for example, there are different regulations in different schools. The fact is, I think only yesterday, some schools in Suffolk are now starting to work together to actually install apps on students' phones that are going to block access to social media, games, internet activity during the school day, and that's part of their process. The reality is every school has a different way of dealing with this. Some schools haven't dealt with it very well. Some schools have dealt with it brilliantly. There is no hard and fast answer with this. And the worry, I think from our point of view in particular, when we've done a lot of research into the options available to us, the worry is that if we're not careful, we can end up misappropriating public funds to do something about this. Take, for example, there are companies out there that will offer little pouches and lockable cabinets that the students can put their phones in. And in some ways, it's a great idea because it takes that temptation away from those students. Apart from the fact that, we're a school of 1,400 students. Once you start doing the maths, I think we worked out just by one set for the whole school would be somewhere in the region of £60,000 worth of education funding.
That's interesting, John, because I've got 3 children. The girls are at a private girls' school. They have Yonder pouches. And my son is at a mixed state school, and they wouldn't be able to afford the Yonder pouches. So that's how all 3 of them are not allowed their phone in the school day. Where this gets slightly complex, I think, is when you bring ed tech into the equation.
Yeah.
Because if on one hand we're saying to children, you can't use smart technology in the day, and I agree with this, I don't want my kids on their phones in the classroom, but then you're also saying that all of our teaching is going to be done through the Google Drive system, that you're not going to be using paper and pen as much, that you have that move away from what I believe to be traditional teaching methods. That's quite confusing for kids. It's quite confusing for my 11-year-old for me to, on one hand, say, no, you're not having a smartphone because we've learned the lessons of my elder 2 children, who, by the way, these 2 teenagers are telling me now not to give their younger sister a smartphone because they think they got one too soon, probably. But then she's going into senior school and everything is on tech.
Yeah, I think part of that is another lesser known hangover from COVID. Because actually, all of a sudden, during the COVID pandemic, schools had to provide everything online, literally overnight. It was very difficult for schools because we hadn't done that. We are still quite classically trained in teaching. We do still like to chalk and talk a little bit. But actually, we had to create an entire education world online. There were some brilliant elements of that. And there's been some fantastic work that's been done by some major tech companies to make the online accessibility and the applications, the resources available, fantastic. But because we've flooded that so quickly, again, I don't think we've paused to look at whether or not it's the right method for everybody. And I know that us as a school, we've actually had to take a very hard look at ourselves and try and draw back from that, and draw back from some of the things that we were using, that we were sort of encouraging students to be a big part of, your Google Classrooms, the Microsoft Teams, these all fantastic packages that are available. But in essence, if we're saying this device could be a big danger to a young person, that we need to moderate at the very least their use of it, we can't then be setting everything through a Google Classroom and a Microsoft Teams and encouraging them to be using that late into the evening to submit work and things as well. We've got to find a better balance.
John, could I just put a quote to you by another head teacher, Colin Crehan. He's the head at Holy Trinity Catholic School in Small Heath, Birmingham. And he said in an interview with the BBC, he said, "It's such a pivotal part of their lives outside of schools. For teachers to then go into the realms of restricting that within school, we're ultimately going to set ourselves up for a battle which we're not going to win." He says that you may make some marginal gains by restricting or banning phones in school, but because the smartphone, to your point, Camilla, is not just part of how young people live, but it's also part of how they learn, isn't a better option, John, to teach young people and give them the capacity to deal with having a mobile phone rather than to ban having mobile phones, given that in the rest of their lives they're going to use them all the time?
Absolutely. I think there's a lot of campaign groups that are looking at having a total ban under the age of 14. You're looking at the regulations that are coming in across the globe about that. I think we've missed that opportunity for a start. We're trying to track back, and I think realistically that's not feasible. I also think that we can't be the generation that, smashes up the printing presses and gets rid of the technology. We're not the Luddites. We need to recognize that this is a part of everybody's life. But what I do think is we need to also recognize that there's a negative side of that, and we need to have better regulations. I'm not saying that we should ban smartphones. And actually, one of the things that we've learned from this whole process is that a total ban won't work. We're 100% saying that the whole way through this. But I do think there still needs to be a lot more work to be done about how we use these. And the biggest part of that, there's 4 areas. You've got schools which need to hold a line to be able to establish that education. And we did some very interesting work with the students straight after the documentary was aired to actually go through algorithms, to go through what happens in the usage of phones, and therefore why they end up at some of these images and reels that they're not necessarily wanting to find, and how they can address that and reverse those processes through the manipulation of it. So as schools, we've got a lot to do to actually work on our education processes. I think one of the joys of the whole documentary was it brought this question out to the public. And actually for parents, I think they have felt quite isolated in trying to understand and also control these devices with young people. I think they haven't felt that everybody else is in the same situation, and the peer pressure of when they should have a smartphone, when they should be able to access this, has meant that it's happened sooner and earlier for every child, so that now primary schools are struggling with this issue of smartphones as much, if not more, than secondary schools are. So the fact that it's brought this to an open network with parents, I think is really beneficial, because there's a lot of conversations that are happening now in homes about how they use their smartphones. And if we can have that conversation between parents and young people, we're going to be in a better position.
Just to bring it full circle, John, to your actual experiment, I did something similar with my 2 eldest children, because I did a smartphone challenge for This Morning on ITV, took away their phones and gave them brick phones for the week. And their impression of it all was they were much happier without the smartphones, but there was a whole FOMO, fear of missing out thing going on. Their perspective was, if the same rules were applied to everyone, and for instance, no one could have access to Snapchat as a rule until whatever age, then they'd be fine with it. But in your teaching experience, John, have children been changed by this technology? Because my argument would always be, children have always been the same. They want boundaries, they want outdoor play, they want friendships, they want to be sociable, they want to be popular. It's the technologies that changed, but not the fundamentals of the children. Whereas somebody like Dr. Jonathan Haidt would argue, no, actually this technology has kind of rewired children's brains.
I think it's an awkward, I don't think it's either or, actually. I've sat in with a conference with Jonathan Haidt recently and listened to a number of people involved in that, and it's really interesting. There is some scientific evidence, the fact that brain patterns have changed and emotional regulations have changed as well. But I think, like anything, when you take that technology away, the essence of children is still that they want to be with friends and they want to play and they want to experience things. I think we need to just look at whether or not we can actually control the amount that we use these devices, control the apps that are available, and have that better regulation that way. I don't think it's a bad thing. I mean, I'm a parent of two girls, and they both have their smartphones as well. So I can sit here as contradictory as anybody in so many ways. But I'm also conscious that I've got a good hold of what they're doing on those smartphones, and therefore making sure that balance is there. In the same way we do with making sure they eat healthily, and the same with making sure they get fresh air and they go for exercise. This can be a perfectly good and hugely beneficial part of someone's life. As adults, we understand just how productive we can be through technological devices, but it has to be in balance. And I don't think, even as a society, I don't think as adults we've got it that well in balance.
I think, Camilla, with Michael Conroy and with John Player, we've heard some pretty solid advice about how we can navigate this really toxic world that so many young people can sometimes get trapped in.
And we're going to be spending the weekend watching the rest of Adolescence, and we recommend that you do the same. We'll be back, though, tomorrow, 5 p.m.